have been closed, and there are no more, and all the ones that are open will never be closed again. How do you know that? Scientists have been saying that forever. What's going to happen when those gaps do close in the future that Anthony Flew refers to? By the way, Anthony Flew is not a deist. You correctly identified him as a deist, which means he does not believe in a God. Deism is not the belief in a God, a personal God. It's the belief in a force of some sort. But even then, Anthony Flew did not give any evidence for this being. What he did was he gave evidence for a current lack of understanding about how we can piece it together. Dawkins, by the way, does not say a life arose by lucky chance. He said it was the opposite of chance. And Anthony Flew, by the way, is hardly considered the leading atheist of the 20th century. He was a pretty solid atheist, and is still something of an agnostic about the question of God. So I wouldn't use him. In fact, a lot of people question whether he even wrote that book.
People can buy his book for themselves.
Yes, of course you can do it, but that book, I understand, was ghostwritten anyway. I don't think he actually wrote the book. Somebody here might understand. Actually, he put his name on it, but someone else wrote it, and then he looked at it and said, yeah. So,
look into it.
Somebody in the question can answer that better than I can, but that's what I read. In any event, Dawkins says natural selection is the opposite of chance. You've mischaracterized Dawkins, and so has Anthony Flew. So, in fact, Dawkins says that arguments like Flew are simply an argument from personal incredulity. I can't understand how this could be, therefore I'm going to have to plug that gap with my God. Notice Peter has not given us any evidence for this being. In fact, the being that you are positing as the answer to complexity, this being of yours, right, who has created this amazing, by the way, the cell is much more complex than just more than a million. There's more than like 3 billion components of every cell, if you count the genes, right, and the DNA. So it's much more complex than even you say. Let's say it's immensely complex, right? How could you and I have ever come up with it? What you are positing is that there is a being who's even more complex than that. Because the creator has to be at least as complex as the thing that it creates in order to create it. If you see a watch on the ground, well, you have to assume that the complexity of the watchmaker is at least as great, if not greater than the watch. So by positing more complexity to explain a simpler complexity, you have begged the question of complexity. You haven't answered the question, well, where did the complexity of God come from? Isn't the mind of this creator intricate and complex? Doesn't it function? Doesn't it have designs? Isn't it more wonderful than a watch or a human eye or a cell with all the billions of components? Therefore, you've answered nothing. You replaced one mystery with another mystery. These design arguments are kind of like the person who says, how did engineers make all those rivers to flow right along the state borders? How did they make the Niagara flow exactly there on the border between the countries? How did that happen? Think of the cost, think of the plan, think of all the design that had to go into that. You're thinking it's backward when you think you see design in nature when it was the other way around. We didn't have to evolve the way we are. We were not the end products of some teleological purpose. The blindness of natural selection is its beauty. It could have been some other beauty, or it could have been nothing that evolved. I debated Norman Geisler, by the way, and he's wrong. It doesn't take faith to be an atheist. In fact, Norman Geisler, he's a biblical apologist, right? And he actually is pretty weak when it comes to cosmological and teleological arguments. So your arguments shoot themselves in the foot. You have simply assumed the very thing you're trying to prove, and that's known as begging the question. It's illogical, and your argument fails.
Well, I've listed Einstein, I've listed Anthony Flew, both respected scholars, and I'll go on and list another one. Of course, none of these are valuable, even though you quote them in your own book. One's the evidence. They claim it was the evidence. It's not just me claiming when I'm on preach or I travel, but I do have the ability to read. And the problem with the whole argument you're making, it only works in here. The moment we leave this room, nobody will believe it. This is like a philosophical laboratory tonight. We can all play little games and say little cute one-liners and make everybody laugh. But once you go out in the parking lot, nobody's going to stand in front of a car and say, there's no manufacturer. No problem. This car could evolve into a 747 in no time. Nobody's going to believe it. But in this laboratory that we're in right now, this philosophical laboratory, we've set aside a few hours tonight to have a little exchange of thoughts and minds, and I just sort of speak from my vantage point, not debating these issues very often. And so, to just write off these people who claim that they have evidence for God, they're no good. There's no answer to this. I don't accept this. Could it be that you're an atheist like Nietzsche, who just doesn't want to be convinced? Maybe your career is vested in this. your career was rested in Christian ministry. Now you've switched, and I appreciate the fact that that was a big step. Let me give you another one here while I'm at it. Let's take from mathematics this time. You know, there's a lottery idea. You know, as unlikely as it is to win the lottery, somebody's going to win it. So maybe the creation of the world was just like that. You know, it was kind of unlikely, but it happened. Well, a very noted scientist, Dr. Emile Morel, formulated the basic law of probability, which states that when an occurrence of event where the chances are beyond 1 in 10 to the power of 50, which is 10 with 50 zeros. If the chance is that, and I won't bother to say it any other way, 1 in 10 to the power of 50, then we can know for sure that that will never happen, regardless of the time allotted. And of course that poses a great mathematical problem for the atheist, because there's no way that the creation took place, or that what we see around us has happened with a chance that was lower than those that were Morel's limit. Noted astronomer and physicist Sir Fred Hoyle calculated the chance that life would have evolved spontaneously to be the chance in 1 in 10 to the power of 40,000. That's a lot of zeros. Noted physicist, astronomer, Hoyle wrote, the current scenario of the origin of life is about as likely as the assemblage of a 747 by a tornado whirling through a junkyard. Now, interesting enough, of course, there was a Harvard professor who counted that. He says, well, given vast amounts of time, biographer Professor George Wall from Harvard said, given so much time, the impossible becomes possible. The possible becomes probable. The probable becomes virtually certain. One only has to wait. Time performs the miracles. Wow, I didn't know that evolutionists believed in miracles, but all right. Thanks for looking out. However, again, that was disputed because a very noted Harvard professor, Elsa Barghorn, using a scanning electron microscope, was testing slabs of stone taken from the oldest rocks able to bear fossils, 3.6 billion year old fossils. And he found fully developed bacteria in these old rocks, about the same time as it was believed that liquid water first formed on the earth. So that showed that the full form was there 3.6 billion years ago of that bacteria. So again, there's so many evidence. But of course all these people, whether Anthony Flew, he's no good anymore, Fred Hoyle, Einstein himself recognized that there was an intelligence. None of this matters. Then, what I'd like to take this on, because we can argue this back and forth. I got a whole list of statements here about this.